So just before we start, I'd like everyone who is able to log into Mentimeter so that we can make this webinar really interactive. So the way that you do that, if you haven't already done that, is you go to menti.com and you enter this 5-digit code that is displayed here, 24534. So if you can be doing that, that would be absolutely great. I will remind people as they join this webinar. By all means, if you've arrived there, then give us a thumbs up or a heart or something like that. I can see that that some of you are there already, which is absolutely brilliant. So let's make a start. Good afternoon to you. I'm Merv Wyeth and I'm a member of the PMI UK digital events team. The webinar is scheduled to last no more than an hour, and it's going to be recorded and added to our digital library, and you can download further information about that in the handout section. We will allow time at the end of the presentation for a short Q&A session, so please use the question box on your console to submit questions during the webinar. So, about discovery-led decision-making. Making strategic decisions is a fundamental skill for leaders and managers. However, in a business environment that is in a constant state of change, making strategic decisions has never been more difficult. Discovery-led decision-making addresses this challenge by providing a framework for making sound decisions in an uncertain world. It's based on the concept of framing, experimenting, and scaling, and this approach ensures that your efforts are focused where the need is greatest, interventions are tested, evaluated, and revised, and successful initiatives are effectively rolled out across the business. Discovery-led decision-making builds on the agile approach to project management as it articulates a more dynamic, fluid approach to strategy, which aligns with agile project management and describes 3 different types of sprint, depending on the type of decision-making required to move things forward. So that's discovery-led decision-making. About our speaker today, Dr. Ben Shenoy. He describes himself as a hybrid, having been an electronic engineer and a management consultant before retraining as a social psychologist. His experience spans academia and practice, as well as both the natural and social sciences. He explores, decodes, and narrates how behavioral science can untangle organizational dilemmas in perplexing times. And he holds a PhD in organizational behavior from Harvard Business School. Ben is a visiting professor at the London School of Economics and a director of the Business Insights Lab at the University of Surrey's Centre for the Digital Economy. Ben is the co-author of a book, Strategic Decision Making, a discovery-led approach to critical choice in turbulent times, which is published by Kogan Page. It was published in January of this year. And he can be found online at benshenoy.com and Twitter at benshenoy. So that's details of Ben. We'll come to Ben very shortly, but just before we do that, I hope that a good number of you have managed to log into menti.com. And here's a couple of questions for you. So first of all, we want to know what type of project-related job role do you typically perform? And here we've got we've categorized the different parts as project leadership, that's senior management, director, etc. Project delivery specialist, that can be main control functions, or the change specialist, so business analysis, change specialist, BCM, benefits manager, which is my area, or others. And then we've got non-project related, or maybe a student. You've yet to kind of embark on your project management career. So thank you for those that are already voting. Those who are joining us will be taken to this page once they've logged in, code there 24534. And in the background, Ben can see the answers and learn a little bit more about your roles. And you will be able to continue to add to this later on. So thank you for those that are already voting. And the next one, this will form a beautiful word cloud, but we want to know what term best describes the main focus of the organization in which you work. So it could be the sector if you like, and please let us know what that is. So we've got data and manufacturing, IT and education coming through. Typically we see quite a lot of people in construction and engineering, but we'll see what leads the way here. And thanks, this is really helpful, does give us a good feel of what you're involved in. So that's good. Okay. So we're now going to get into the topic, and here we're going to do a few changes back and forth between myself and Ben. Ben, just to give me the comfort that you are on the line, do you want to introduce yourself briefly?
Thanks, Merv. Good morning, everyone. My name's Ben Shenoy. Good afternoon, I should say, if you're in the UK. Welcome wherever you are. I'm delighted to be with you today. So Merv, yes, I'm here. Let's start, because Merv's already done a great introduction about my background. Let's start with a question. And I encourage you to, if you haven't logged into menti.com with the code 24534, please go ahead and do so, because we're going to be doing a lot of participation today, just to make it really interactive. So the first question: how do we make decisions under conditions of uncertainty? And this is going to be another word. It's actually going to be a bunch of speech bubbles. But just what pops into your head if you think about this question? How do we make decisions under conditions of uncertainty? So how have you tackled it in the past? How have you seen colleagues tackle it? So seek advice from experts, brilliant. Tentative probing questions, draw on your experience, use research and analysis of various flavors. Again, experience, we've got feelings coming in here and recommendations from experts. Gather more information, so do some more data gathering and analysis. Okay, what do we got? Research and use SMEs, that's interesting. Past experience, analyze stakeholders, so use the collective wisdom. So brilliant questions here. Oh, Google, excellent. And again, experience. So great. Right. Merv, do you want to, actually, we'll go on to the next question. So that's great start. Let's make this a little bit more specific. If you're imagine you're in the automotive industry. You're a car manufacturer. Looking forward 5, 10, 20 years, what do you need to be thinking about? What sorts of things do you need to be thinking about? So same thing, just type in your answers to this. Growth and sustainability, so good business objectives. What else we got? Future regulations, future needs, economic conditions. So this is an interesting one, right? We're educating people by getting them to buy what's good for the environment at a profitable price. Fuel economy, which sort of ties into the environment. Possible energy sources. This is fascinating in the auto sector, how the energy sources have changed, are changing right now. So this specifically goes into EV, electronic vehicles and regulation, fuel, technology, automation, automation of different sorts. And we haven't got it specifically, but maybe automated cars and driverless cars, autonomous vehicles. We have autonomous vehicles, safety, oil and fuel, battery performance. This is fabulous. Great. Excellent. Merv, if we could flip over to my machine now.
Okay, here we go.
Brilliant. Let's see if we can get the technology to do our bidding. So hopefully you can see on your screen a picture. It happens to be an Audi. So let's draw on some of your wisdom and draw on some of the things I'm seeing. I'm actually working with a big German car manufacturer right now. So this is a live issue that I'm wrestling with my client. So the first thing I put up here is, that's a picture of Shanghai. So I don't know how many of you have got exposure to the automotive industry, either because you work in there or you supply the big auto manufacturers, or whatever your interaction that you provide services to them. But there is this huge shift into the East, China specifically. Just to put this in context, if you look at Mercedes-Benz, until probably 10 years ago, their biggest division was Europe. Then it became America. And in the last 18 months, their biggest division, outselling Europe and America, is China. And this is a quite premium brand German car manufacturer. So just shows you the shift in economic power to the East. And Daimler is just one, Mercedes-Benz is one. The same applies to VW and Ford and all the Jaguar Land Rover, all of them. So big economic shift in power. Second one, this is an Audi A7. You can see it's in racing livery. It's driverless. And at the moment, it is about 2.5 seconds slower than the fastest racing driver. That will change. I don't know when. It might change the next year. It might change the next 5 years. But the autonomous car will outperform the human being. Third thing, this is a picture. This little map of the world shows you it was a picture of mega urbanization. So various statistics and forecasts, but the rough estimate is between 65 and 80% of the world will be living in megacities in the next 30 years, 30 to 40 years. So if you're a car manufacturer, this has huge implications for you because cities and cars don't mix that well. Final one, here's a quote from a 27-year-old lady. Interesting, we didn't poll your ages. I am older than 27, as you can probably guess from my picture. But look at this. Owning a car used to be a symbol of freedom, which I certainly identify with. While it still is, it definitely has also become a heavyweight financial burden. When I teach at the LSE, my students, master's students, are sort of 25 to 30. If I ask them, if I give you the money, how many of you would want to own cars? Only about 20 to 25% of them actually say they want to own a car. So if you're a car manufacturer, this is the world you're living in. And hopefully you can start seeing not only these big shifts. Let me point out a business model change here. If you are in the business of building and selling cars, increasingly, especially with autonomous driving, it might be that in future you don't sell cars, or you don't sell cars to the users of the cars. You sell the cars to someone, you transfer ownership of the asset to someone else, and then there is the provision of a service, and it's maybe not 1 or 2 cars per family, but 1 or 2 cars per 3 or 4 families. So you start getting into new ownership models, which has all sorts of implications. This is one sector. Let's go to another sector. Let's imagine you're in the infrastructure sector. What do you need to be thinking about? So let me just control the technology.
I think I've grabbed it back, actually,
Oh,
Ben.
brilliant. Thank you. Oh, you can do that. I didn't know you could do that. Good. Excellent. So same thing. If you're in the infrastructure sector, what do you need to be thinking about? So we have accessibility, resource availability, short versus long-term costs, benefits, what's required to decommission. Oh, that's a nice point. So you're looking at the whole life cycle of the asset. So tear down, absolutely right. Logistics, resources, and sources of resources. Home working, okay, so this is how assets are being used differently because of societal trends enabled by technology. Can we make the eco-friendly, the environmental thing, not only in cars, but also in infrastructure of various sorts? Anything else? Oh, that's an interesting one. Micro power generation. So can we distribute power generation so we go from big to distribute small assets? Cost of the economy, right? And wherever you are in the world, infrastructure is a huge thing across many different sectors. So, for example, going back to the automotive sector, all these electronic cars we're talking about will only work if we've built the charging infrastructure to support them. Recyclability. If you're in the oil and gas industry, how do you build rigs better? If you're in the pharmaceuticals industry, can you build your factories faster? Because if you can save 6 months in the speed of building a factory, that's 6 months of patent life on your drug. So massive, massive changes here. If I may grab back control, Merv.
Yeah, let's just do that. There you go.
Integration, brilliant, thank you. Let's see what I had on my slides. So great points you're raising. So I've got here composite materials. This picture on the bottom right is, it's actually, there are a number of companies that are starting to use wood combined with steel and with steel to build relatively tall buildings. We're talking sort of more than 10 stories out of wood and wood composites. So implications for environment and recyclability, obviously requirements around strength. This is this picture on the bottom left. This is assembly. This is basically turning buildings into Lego bricks. So off-site construction and modular construction. There's a Swedish company that's doing a lot of this, one of many, who are changing the construction process by how they build a product. The next one I've got up is here is a 3D printed house. So a couple of years ago, an American university, I think it was in California, 3D printed a house in 24 hours. So once we've scaled up that technology, it could fundamentally change the construction supply chain and how you build projects. This final picture, top right, I'm not going to go into it because none of us can read it. This is an IoT picture. So how do you instrument a building? I did some work with a construction company recently around IoT for hospitals, because if you build the right sensors in, and if you talk to the IoT researchers, they can pretty much measure what you want them to measure. And the generations of sensors building is quite rapid. But of course, this, if you can weave this into your infrastructure building, you can have smart buildings, intelligent buildings, which you can use to measure use, environmental consequences, asset allocation, resource optimization, lots of things going on. Again, you go to what is naively quite a straightforward sector, and look how it's changing based on what's happening in the world around. And one more question I'm going to ask you, and then we'll go into how does the framework that we've posed. So have you grabbed back control? You have, brilliant. So let me tell you a story, or set up a story for you. There is an app called BioBeats, and you should be able to see the picture on the phone there, on an iPhone. The story goes as this. Google used to have what they, and so I'm sure a number of you have heard of this, they used to have Friday projects. You could spend 20% of your time at Google, typically Fridays, doing whatever you liked. One of the guys at Google, very smart guy, wrote an app to measure your brain waves, and based on that, select music to play to you. Now, the music's interesting, right? You can use it to dial yourself up, or you can use it to dial yourself down. He posted it on the OSS website, the open source software website. A couple of other guys picked up this idea, thought it was great, set up a startup called BioBeats. They converted it into an app. They touted it around conferences. Someone at a conference made the obvious point of no one wants to walk down the high street with wires sticking out of their head going into their mobile phone, their cell phone, their smartphone. So how about, instead of using brainwaves, you use an infrared sensor on the back of your smartphone to measure blood flow in your skin, and use that as a proxy for measuring activity, heart rate variability. So they did this. And by the way, they rewrote the code in 6 hours. So it's quite fast, quite agile. Question, who would be interested in this app? What sort of organizations or people would be interested in an app that measures your heart rate variability on a smartphone using the infrared sensor on the back of your phone to measure heart rate variability? Airline industry? Ooh, interesting one. People with health conditions, health services, sports. Yes, that's interesting. Health conditions and sports are almost two ends of the spectrum. Do I want to dial you down for stress, or do I want to dial you up to make your heart pump harder, right? So sports and health are so we've got the sports industry, we've got the NHS, again, health and stress. We've got medical, pharma. Yep, absolutely. You can wrap this around, you can provide a drug and then wrap a service around it using this app. Retailers, yes, indeed. What's the state in which you are as you walk through my shop, whether it's the shop is physical or virtual? Life insurance, of course. This data might give me a better handle on risk and your life expectancy. Employers. Employers could be to do, I guess, with measuring stress of my employees, employee well-being. Individuals, I might be interested as an individual in my own personal stress state. Medical healthcare, brilliant. Let's see what's actually happening. Merv, if I could ask you to pass back to me. There we go, thank you. Let's see what this company's actually doing. You were right on the money. So it started off with, hang on, I'm just controlling the technology. It started off at Google, and a bunch of similar companies became very interested. Microsoft, Samsung, and Apple. All of these companies are interested in health, as you well know. So they were interested in it. And then it gets more interesting. AXA, and AXA not as an insurance company, but as an employer. AXA are very interested in this company because they're interested in employee well-being and stress. Paribas is slightly more different. Paribas as a trading bank, they are using it on a pilot with traders on their trading floor, and they're using Microsoft Band 2s. So I don't know how many of you are interested in wearables, but the Band 2 is particularly interesting because it does galvanic skin resistance. So it's quite a good measure of stress. So they're using it to try and do deep learning, machine learning, into when traders might start making bad decisions on behalf of the bank. So it's partly about welfare of the employee. It's also about welfare of the trading book. So employees and people. Bupa, you were spot on with Bupa. Bupa are interested because they're interested in stress management programs where you go and visit your Bupa doctor and they can diagnose based on richer data. And then finally, Aviva. Aviva, unlike AXA, Aviva are interested as a life insurance company. And I want you to notice two things about this final example. One, if I asked you, and we're not going to do this, but just I want you to think about these two questions. One, what sector is this? Is this technology? Is it music? Is it health? Is it financial services? Or is it all of the above? The second thing I want you to reflect upon is, can you see with all of these that the technology is really interesting, but almost just the start, what the technology does is opens up a Pandora's box of social issues. In this particular case, who owns the data? Who has the right to this data? What are the ethics of this? Assuming I'm prepared to share my data with you, what price should you pay to me for the data? It's a whole bunch of things that you need to think about. And when we're talking about making decisions under uncertainty, more and more sectors are confronting this really messy environment. Okay, so let's come back to the starting question. How do we make decisions under uncertainty? So Merv's now put up a question. When do we make the biggest decisions on any project or initiative that we undertake? Beginning, middle, or end? Okay, that's interesting. So 75%, 25%, 20%. Okay, right. So great. So the bulk of you, about 3/4 of you, are saying the beginning, and then a few of you are saying, middle or end. So I would agree with you, the majority of you, that we typically look at most project management methodologies and most management methodologies more generally. We have an idea, we have a definition phase, we have a requirements phase, whatever you want to call it. We tend to try and work out where we're heading, what our objective is, and what decisions we make based on those objectives, skewed towards the beginning of any initiative. So about 3/4. So Merv, if I could ask you to pass back to me.
Okay, there we go.
Brilliant, thank you. If I share this, let's move on to the next slide. So let me reflect what you told me with this graph. And here you'll see a graph which is the x-axis is the time of the project, start to end. We have two lines. One is the dotted line is an attempt to characterize when do we make the biggest decisions. And I would agree with the survey we just had, where most of our decisions are towards the beginning of the project. And then, yeah, we make big decisions later on, but it tends to tail off. Now, reflect back on the examples we've just had. The biggest decisions, increasingly, we're in an uncertain world. I would say we start off with less and less knowledge at the beginning, and hopefully we learn. Hopefully, we don't always learn, but hopefully we learn, in which case the curve goes up. And hopefully you can see a problem here. We make the biggest decisions at the beginning of any initiative, and we know very little, if you agree with this graph. So we have a problem here, this gap between the two lines earlier on in the initiative project. And this is one of the reasons why we wrote the book we wrote, which is about discovery-led decision making, which is really about saying, how can we learn faster? How can we bring that solid line up? And how can we bring the dotted line down so we spread our decisions over time? And if you look at a number of management approaches, agile, design thinking, lean startup, they're all trying to cope with this problem, which is this gap early on in a project. How can we learn more and spread our decisions to spread our risk over time? Right. And just a little illustration of the problem we face, a weather forecasting stone. Can you see, hopefully, at the bottom of this picture, a little rock? And then this is we want to do better prediction than this, or better anticipation of the future than this. Stone is wet, rain. Stone is dry, not raining, etc. My favorite one on this picture is the penultimate one: stone jumping up and down, earthquake. We want to move slightly beyond this sort of sophistication of our management methods. So, how do we act to introduce our framework? How should we act when we know how to do something? So Merv's already taken back control. Thank you, Merv. Give some thought to this question. How do we act when we know how to do something? When we have knowledge, and on my slide, consistently initiate change with certainty of outcome, continuously follow the plan, act quickly, don't waste time, speed to value, be challenging, plan and execute, monitor. Right, plan, do, review, right? Absolutely right. Get on with it, stop wasting time, stop talking about it, with agility, right? And again, agility I expect here, I'm interpreting as with speed, right? Be self-confident, communicate that you know what you're doing. Brilliant. So Merv, if I can flip back, efficiently, absolutely right. Brilliant, thank you, Merv. What I would say, I would agree with everything you've said, and it's business as usual. How do we do more of what works? And I'm going to use a particular word here. I'm going to say scale. We need to scale. And I would argue, if you look at there's increasingly, there are a lot of people who knock what you might call 20th century management. There is a place for 20th century management, and that place is when we know what we're doing and we want to do more of it. I would argue the central challenge of industrial organizations in the 20th century, and I'm going back to Ford and mass production and all the way down through the 20th century, the central problem they addressed was, we know what we want, or we're going to build something, this is what you want, we're going to push it on you. Now, how do we do more of it? More, repeatably, consistently. And that is a really important thing to be able to do. And classic management is really good at it. When we know what we do, we have a set of technologies, Six Sigma, Lean, etc., which are good at replication and reducing variability. I want to tell you a quick story now. There's a map here. This is a map of a pond, what the Americans call a pond, we would in Europe would call a lake, because the Americans do everything bigger. It's called Fresh Pond. It's in Massachusetts. And over 100 years ago, before electricity, this pond used to freeze because it's in New England, and there would be a whole ice farming industry. And they would farm blocks of ice, and they would use horses because they didn't have cars in those days. The horses would pull these ropes to move these blocks from the pond to a storehouse. And let me show you a picture of ice farming. There we are farming ice. This is over 100 years ago. So there's a whole sector. And here's an ice store. Now, at some point in the 19th century, someone discovered electricity, actually, current electricity. Some other bright spark designed a fridge, a freezer. And rationally, if you're in the ice farming business, you'd think what you should do is either basically get out of the sector, or switch direction, or get into ice farming, refrigeration or whatever. The important thing about this story, the point I want to make is their response was a very psychological one. And we see this with a lot of established companies. They increased productivity of ice farming by 150%. What we do as human beings is, when we're under stress, we do more of whatever we do. It's called the dominant response. So we pedal harder when perhaps we should get off the bike. Or as Gary Hamel put it, those who live by the sword will be shot by those who don't. I'll say that again. Those who live by the sword will be shot by those who don't. So we have this challenge, scale. We know what we should do when we know what's going on the left-hand side of this picture. We should do more of what works. But what should we do when we don't know what's going on? What is the different type of decision-making and action we should engage in when we don't know what's going on? So thoughts on that? Merv has taken back control. There we go. So what sort of thoughts do you have?
Then as those answers are coming in, I'll just remind people that they can submit questions separately. We've got a few, but
yes,
for the Q&A at the end. So just a quick reminder.
So research, explore and experiment, try something, solicit ideas and methods, carefully hedge our bets. So, option theory, rethink, prototype, watch others. Brilliant. Be aware of the risks. Let's have a look. Lots of answers. Carefully research, consult for ideas. Yes, absolutely right. And the point I want to make is, this is great, and it's different from scaling. That's what I'd argue. So, Merv, if I could have the speaking stick back, please.
There you go.
Brilliant. So you're spot on. I would say, I call it experiment, but you've pretty much said it. Instead of doing more of what works, this is about learning. How do we learn what we need to know? And we do some analysis, but a lot of it is actually doing stuff rather than thinking about stuff. So the emphasis goes from analysis towards action. Try stuff, because when we don't know what we're doing, actually our assumptions may be wrong, right? And the best way to test things is to try stuff out. Okay. Next question. Let's Merv, for logistics, shall we leave? Should we leave the slide up?
I've switched it across. Is that what you mean? I think people can
Yeah,
see. Oh,
I'm
right.
just.
Yeah.
Oh, brilliant. Okay, brilliant. Can you see this? Hopefully, you can see this. The companies that Merv's put up on my slide on the screen. So I'll just read them out because they're a little bit small on my screen. What do these firms have in common? Levi Strauss, AT&T, Kirin, which is a Japanese beer manufacturer, Kodak, Marks and Spencers, Boeing, SSIH ASOG. Just in case you don't know what SSIH is, it's the Federation of Swiss Watch Manufacturers. So I'm sure you've heard of their brands: Rolex, Tissot, Tag Heuer, etc. Bausch and Lomb, Philips, General Motors, Ciba-Geigy, US Steel, DEC, the computer company, Digital Equipment Corporation, Nike, Polaroid, Siebel, the CRM software company, Nokia, IBM, Xerox, Pan Am, Ogilvy and Mather. So just have a think. What's going on here? Right. Leaders in their fields. Six Sigma. Except no Toyota here. Yes. Make products to serve customers. Been around for a long time. Global customers. Um, Large R&D budget. They all made product mistakes. Really interesting. Really interesting. Went through crisis and reinvented themselves. Products became defunct. Brilliant. There's two aspects to this. There's two things they have in common. All have had to rethink their market position. Absolutely right. Lost lead in industry, manufacturing, production. Yes. So, Merv, if I can pass back the speaking ball,
Okay.
the speaking stick, I should say. So, your spot, really, really sharp answers. All of these companies did two things. They created a market, not just a product. They created a market. These were all market makers. So, for example, Nokia was at the forefront of the cell phone market. Nike, shoes, Levi's, jeans, Pan Am, the airline industry. All of them were market makers. They became market leaders because of their success, which is why you know most of these brands. And they all faced a crisis. Some of them succeeded in reinventing themselves, some did not. So, for example, IBM has reinvented itself arguably twice, and it'll be interesting to see whether they can reinvent themselves a third time. The jury's out at the moment. Pan Am failed to reinvent themselves. Okay. Nokia, again, an example of one that didn't reinvent themselves in the cell phone business, though they're still in telecoms. So what's the point here? The point here is this. There's something about the tyranny of success. If you look at all those companies, they all started off experimenting and they found a market. They did a search, they found a product and a market for that product, which made them really, really big and successful. And they had to switch from being good at experimenting to scaling. All of these companies became successful because they could operate at scale. All of them faced a crisis because the world around them changed. And some of them managed to experiment again, and some did not. And this has been called in the research the tyranny of success. There are two very different disciplines here. One is the decision making around experimentation and the decision making around scale. And those of you who work in large organizations will know that innovating in large organizations turns out to be really, really hard. Startups are great at experimentation and pretty bad at scaling, and large incumbents typically are the opposite. So I've now put up on the slide this term VUCA, and I just want a very simple question for you. How many, I want to get a sense of how many of you have come across the term VUCA. Okay, so it is worth going through this. Okay, brilliant. Merv, should we head back?
Yeah, let's go back.
Okay, that's
There we go.
very useful. I'm glad we asked this question. I didn't want to make assumptions. Okay, the term VUCA, coined by the military in about 1990, they used it. The US military had been used to dealing with the Soviet Union, which is big and scary but predictable. And then both the Soviets and the Americans went into Afghanistan in the 80s, and they encountered the Mujahideen, who are small and unpredictable, and they pop up, cause chaos, and disappear. And of course, now we have the Taliban, we have ISIS, etc. But it's the Mujahideen who first caused the military to think about what is it that's going on. And they describe the Mujahideen environment as VUCA, volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. So volatile means the world's changing fast. Uncertain means I don't know where we're going to end up. Complex means there's many different factors that contribute to this. And ambiguous means I don't even know whether this is good or bad, the thing that's just happened. I can't interpret it. And increasingly, this term is being used in management, business, leadership, whatever you want to call it, project management, right? We're encountering VUCA times. And hopefully you can see an echo of that when we talked about the car industry, the infrastructure sector, and my sort of stress management app. The world is increasingly VUCA. And there are three forces that drive this. In the interest of time, I'm just going to skip through this quite quickly. One is about emerging technology, not just digital technology. A whole bunch of technology is creating uncertainties. Technology in various forms is opening a Pandora's box of unpredictability. The second one is people and planet. You've already touched upon that with our examples earlier, whether it's energy or the shift in populations. The north and west of the world are old and wealthy, and the south and east of the world are much younger and typically less wealthy, and climate change. So people and planet is creating a whole bunch of pressures on us. And the third one is what I'd call open versus closed. Open means at the level of countries, it's globalization and the reaction to globalization, whether it's Donald Trump in the US or Brexit and what's happening in Spain and Italy and France and Holland. All through the world, there's a reaction to globalization. At the level of a company, there's this whole tension between competitive advantage and ecosystems and open innovation. So there's this tension between, do we open ourselves up to the world or do we put up the barriers? And all those three things are driving VUCA. So I think this is our final question, Merv.
Yeah, here we go.
How should we act in a VUCA environment? Cautiously, with agility, continuously seek feedback, carefully. The interesting interpretation of risk here going on in terms of caution versus jump in. Take a lead. That's an interesting one. Are we the first mover or the fast follower? Build networks, networks specifically to make sense, helps make sense of what the world's doing on. Be courageous. Take a lead. So some interesting differences in attitudes to risk here. Probe, inquire, poke the environment with a stick. I love that. So that's a form of experimentation. Iteratively, what else have we got? Have a strongly defined goal. So purpose, what the police or the military call commander's intent. Collaborate, small steps with determination. So hopefully in your distribution of answers, you can see there's a very interesting distribution of risk appetite we've got amongst you guys. So let us close with the last piece of this. Thank you, Merv. So my argument is, yes, you should scale, you should experiment. But balancing between the two is clearly not easy. Remember the tyranny of success. In a VUCA, a really VUCA environment, I would argue you need to do a different type of decision making, which I'm going to call frame. We love to problem solve. I think there's something about saying about problem finding. What's the right problem to solve in a VUCA environment? That's especially important in a VUCA environment because in statistics, we have type 1 and type 2 error. Some people jokingly talk about type 3 error, which in management speak you'd say is solving the wrong problem precisely. So go back to my ice farming example. Can you see that increasing productivity of ice farming by 150% is perhaps solving the wrong problem precisely, when in fact we should have got out of the ice farming industry, or I don't know, got into ice sculpture or something. But the answer was not increased productivity, it was something else. So this is about asking questions. And I want to, this is Mark Twain, and he had wrote a very relevant quote a long time ago. He said, in a VUCA environment, he didn't say that, but I did, it ain't what you don't know that gets you into trouble. It's not the unknown, it's your assumptions. It's what you know for sure that just ain't so, right? The ice farming industry is going to carry on. We just need to be more productive. That's the assumption that killed those guys. And two slightly more modern stories about the dangers of being blinkered to a changing world. Not quite as complex as some of the stuff we had. So Barbie and Bratz. So Barbie was first developed as a girl's toy in what, the 1950s, 1960s, became the dominant product in that category. One of the interesting things about girls between the 1960s and the 1990s was, and I'm guessing some of you might be parents, so those of you who have daughters may be able to experience this. I have two daughters. They matured faster in the 1990s than they did in the 1960s. Mattel, who made Barbie, didn't notice this obvious shift because they were so focused on sweating their product line and scaling, right? Building product extensions to Barbie. What happened was another company came along with Bratz. They launched it in 1999, zero market share. They took 20% of the market in 3 years from a dead start. So Mattel was arguably solving the wrong problem. They were so focused on sweating their product line, they didn't see the change in the socioeconomic circumstances, the sociocultural trends in their market, i.e. girls, who were, in the 50s were probably 5 to 15, by the 90s were probably 5 to 8, because they were maturing so fast. Another story to illustrate this, potato crisps. So there was a company called Smith's, and you can see from this picture, in the 1920s, 1930s, they used to sell it in greaseproof packets wrapped in greaseproof paper. The product would last, say, 3 days, and then it would go stale. So it had to have a high product turnover. So they sold it through pubs because the product would run off the shelves quickly. Two things happened between the 1930s and the 1960s. One, packaging technology changed. So it became the foil that we see now, plastic and then metal foil. So the product life would go from 3 days to several months. And second thing that happened was we went from small grocery stores to supermarkets. Why am I showing you these pictures? Because Smith's was so focused on its core business of selling greaseproof paper packets to pubs, they didn't notice that Walker's had entered the market and was selling to supermarkets until Walker's was larger than Smith's and then bought them out. So the dangers of just running your shop without solving the problem, or not solving the right problem. And to end with, I'm going to end with Albert Saint-Georges. He's a Nobel Prize winner in chemistry. And in the spirit of framing, he said, discovery consists of seeing what everyone else has seen and thinking what no one has thought. So let me bring this all together in closing by showing you the whole framework. Here's the whole framework. If we go from project management to decision-making to leadership, I would argue as leaders, we need to engage in different types of decision-making based on how much we know, how much we don't know, and how much we think we know. And intellectually, we can all get this, but psychologically, it's really hard to flip from different types of risk, different types of variation. So on the right-hand side of this picture, where the green experiment is, basically we want lots of variation. That's what creativity is. We want to take lots of risks, managed, what Spotify would call in experiments with limited blast radius. And then we want to flip over at some point to scale, where actually we want to reduce the variation. That's what Six Sigma is, after all, right? We want to manage our risk down, reduce the variation. Notice also the difference in attitude to failure. Failure in the green circle is smart. It's learning. It is smart failure. Failure on the left-hand side with the yellow circle, arguably, if we keep making the same mistakes, that's stupid failure. How, as leaders, do we know when failure is smart and when failure is stupid? That's an interesting question. And then finally, once in a while, we need to flip into this different type of sprint. These are 3 different types of sprint, which is just to slow down and say, so what's the business we're in? What problem are we trying to solve? Really? Are we in the business of selling cars, or are we in transportation? What is it that we sell? And to manage those ideas, I would link this to Darwinian theory of, Darwin's about variation of genes and mutation. Most of those genes are selected out through adaptive selective pressure, and then the ones that survive become the new evolution of a species or a set of genes. So I would say we need to take an evolutionary approach to ideas and products. So we have this evolutionary chain here. At the right-hand side with experimentation, we want let 1,000 flowers bloom. We want more and more experiments within our resource base. We want lots of variety. Out of 100 ideas that we create, we want to probably kill 95% of them. So we want to encourage people to have lots of ideas, and then we want to kill most of them, which psychologically turns out to be really hard. But if we need to kill most of them because most of them won't work. So we need to select out brutally. And then with the ones that survive, we need to scale them up, which in Darwinian terms is adaptation to the new market. This hopefully brings together this framework of different types of decision making underpinning an evolutionary approach. And hopefully you can see the implications for us as leaders when we make different decisions and exercise different sprints based on where we are with a particular initiative. Okay, let me stop there and say thank you very much. Merv, do you want to take over?
Yeah. I think if you continue to display that screen, we just use that as a backdrop for a couple of questions that I've got. One that this is a fantastic framework, and the theory seems very strong. I wonder if you're able to identify any examples where this has given particular organizations some sort of insight, and they've reacted, and what the impact of that has been.
Yeah, so I'll just give you one example. I can give you more, but one for a time. I've been working with a construction company that's building an NHS trust hospital. It's an A&E specialist hospital. But basically, it hadn't been spec'd correctly, so they hadn't spec'd the infrastructure for. Basically, they hadn't instrumented it properly to provide information, so that the network backbone was of the wrong spec. They hadn't fibered the whole building. So it would have cost £10 million to rewire the whole building. No one had the money. The government, the trust, the construction consortium, no one had the money. So what we ended up doing was a business model experiment to say, what services could you provide to build the infrastructure for no cost, but you get a revenue share of the products and services that you sell through the backbone. So what we ended up with was a partnership where the construction company's partners are installing the backbone for free to the trust, but they're taking a share of revenue from basically entertainment to patients and their visitors in this A&E hospital. So it went quite quickly from being, this is a framing problem, an experimentation problem, and then eventually it'll be a scaling problem. It went from being, oh heck, a technical problem, we spec'd it wrong, to a financial problem, we ain't got the money, to a business model experiment where you said, could we do this? How about we try negotiate a very different form of business model for how we normally build assets? Hopefully that illustrates, I can give more, but that's the sort of practical application of this framework. And hopefully you can see these are very different types of decisions they're making, and they're having to flip between them.
Okay, yeah, no, that's a brilliant example. Perhaps the last question, I think, and it's quite clear the person asking the question has very clear views themselves, but should technological determinism drive our future, i.e. technology is developed and then we try to find a solution, i.e. the solution driving the need?
I think, oh, that's a really interesting one. I don't think it is quite one way as that. From all I've seen, so this is the engineer in me speak. Partly, I'm both an engineer and a psychologist. It's quite interesting. I would have answered more confidently yes 10 or 15 years ago, but I've seen so many examples of where we build a technology and we have a problem, and then either it doesn't solve, we have a solution and we don't find a problem to it, or the timing's wrong, or actually it solves another problem brilliantly. So I think it's more of an intelligent stumbling around between supply and demand, and supply being technology as an input to a solution, but then demand where, and hopefully this is clear, I haven't said this, but actually in the world of VUCA, not only do we not know what's going on, the customer doesn't know either. So if you talk to car companies, they don't know what people want from buying their cars in 20 years' time. Or we can, so you ask them, but don't listen always to what they say. Watch what they do. So the experiment, the shift from analysis to experimentation. As a psychologist, I'm more interested in what people do, what they say. So experiment is my answer to that.
Yeah, in fact, the previous webinar, one of the key things that he said is that you don't ask people what they want, you ask people what they want to do, so that they're actually much more invested in their response, and you're more likely to build the right solution. So I think that's really quite neat.
I totally agree with that.
So what we'll do, we'll draw this to an end now. So one or two of you have already responded. We're great believers in reflective practice within the digital events team. So we're looking for you just to tell us what you've learned from this webinar. We've got a few answers already. I'll leave this slide up so that you can respond immediately after the webinar as well, after a bit of reflective thought. But please do let us know. I love this one in terms of interactive webinars are possible. Thank you, well done.
That was what we were aiming for.
Yes, yeah, it was quite a challenge, but I think we displayed the right screen at more or less the right time. So that's great. The bit I think that will interest many of our audience is that there is a PDU on offer from this. We've actually split it to try and reflect what it's all about. So half a point strategic, leadership, and then technical, a quarter respectively. But that's the way that the PDU breaks down. You can claim your PDU in the normal way, and we've got a PDU code for you to do that. The recordings in our digital library, you can download them from the handout. There's all the links there, and you'll need the password PMI UK Digital. Do please contact Ben if you want to know more. There's the contact details.
Brilliant.
And finally, we've got a couple of future events that we've already teed up. I can see some significant links to Ben's presentation from both of them, perhaps in slightly different ways. So sure. Martin Paver has been confirmed for the 28th, so the end of this month. Again, 12 o'clock lunchtime, lessons learned, how advanced data and analytics may hold the key. And then we're still trying to sort out a date for Paul Sloan about Leader's Guide to Lateral Thinking Skills. So two superb events coming up. I think really with that, our timekeeping has been perfect. A massive thank you to to you, Ben, for such a thought-provoking and useful presentation. And thanks also to our attendees who've actively participated and give their thoughts. What you will find is that you'll be invited to put your email in, and that will allow you to download all the Mentimeter results. And do please use that reflective practice slide that I'll gallop back to and leave this open. So I think we're probably done. Thank you very much, Ben.
Thank you very much, guys. And thanks, Merv. Enjoyed it.
Okay.